Hi, and welcome to the Debrief. This is Carolina Journal's weekly recap of everything happening in public policy and politics. We've got a big year ahead and a big week that we've really been covering a lot of this news, so thanks for sticking around. I'm Donna King. I'm editor-in-chief of the Carolina Journal, and of course, Mitch Kokai from the John Locke Foundation is here with us. And then from the CJ team, we have David Larson, the opinion editor for Carolina Journal, and Katie Zender, who's been covering lots going on down at the General Assembly and in some of these political races that we're really watching closely. So this week, we're going to be talking a little bit about former President Donald Trump wading into the Congressional 13 district race with an endorsement. Got the details on that. And the state finally clears a kind of embarrassing backlog of, more than 10,000 untested rape kits. This is something we've been covering a lot at Carolina Journal. We've got the details on that. Plus, the state high court heard some really interesting oral arguments. We're going to bring you the details and the latest Carolina Journal poll. Okay, let's start with an update on elections. You don't have to wait till November if you want to cast a ballot, right? We've got another race coming up in May, another election.
That's right, Donna. So the voters' job is not done until November. We have the runoffs coming in May 14th. We've got three races: the lieutenant governor's race, the state auditor's race, and the 13th Congressional District. So in the lieutenant governor's race, we've got Hal Weatherman and Jim O'Neill. And then whoever wins that runoff will be going up against Senator Rachel Hunt to replace Mark Robinson, who is, of course, running for governor. Then we've got state auditor. We've got Dave Balik and Jack Clark. Whoever wins that will be going up against Libertarian Bob Drack, and then the Democratic incumbent Jessica Holmes, who was appointed by the former auditor Beth Woods.
She was appointed by Governor Cooper to replace Beth Woods,
correct,
right?
yes.
Of course.
And then in the 13th Congressional District, this is the most hotly contested race. We've got Brad Knott going up against Kelly Daughtry to face off against Frank Pierce, the winner of this race will replace Representative Wiley Nickel, who currently represents that district.
Okay, all right. So tell me again, so we were just talking a little bit about it. What's the latest in that Congressional District 13 race?
Right, so in that race, Brad Knott was just endorsed at the end of last week by former President Trump. He was also endorsed on Monday by AFP state chapter. It was in a tweet from Tyler Voigt, the state director for the NC AFP chapter. Okay,
so you had a chance to talk to these campaigns. What did you learn? They have some interesting things to say about each other for sure.
Yes, so very fiery, lots of verbal firebombs being thrown back and forth at each other via me.
Right, that's the way it always works out.
Using the press.
But very spicy, throwing firebombs back and forth at each other the last couple of weeks. Brad Knott's campaign was actually targeted last week with AI altered photos in some campaign ads. So, and this is not the first time that we've seen that. A few weeks ago, Mark Walker's campaign, prior to when he pulled out of the 6th district, which almost went into a runoff until he pulled out because he was offered a job by President Trump, his campaign was also targeted by AI altered audio.
Okay, yes. All right, so that's a big deal. One of the things you can find Katie's article on carolinajournal.com. You got to see what these campaigns are pulling out, all the stops, I think, in this CD13 race. What struck you about this back and forth, kind of backroom thing? What was the takeaway, you think?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. It's kind of indirectly throwing shots at each other. Not direct, but very, very subtle, but very spicy. They're not afraid to pull out all the stops.
Of course. What race are you watching about this? Because I like this sort of inside baseball thing.
Yeah, I guess I'm looking at NC-13 and I'm trying to think. So last time around, you had Bo Hines. He was initially seen as kind of an outsider, but with President Trump's endorsement and AFP, then he seemed to, maybe Devan Barber and Kelly Daughtry had a lot of momentum at first, and then when Trump had an event for Bo Hines, endorsed him, came out strong. Even though he wasn't really from there, it kind of pulled Bo Hines to win that primary. I wonder if this will kind of show Trump's endorsements, like how much power they're still wielding, but there's a lot of momentum that comes with that. So by endorsing Knott, you can see even though he had a little bit of controversy over whether he was living in a couple, had addresses in different places, or his voting history wasn't necessarily lining up with his address and something like that. If he wasn't seen as truly a person of the district like Kelly Daughtry, who has a really long history in the district. But this endorsement by Trump, maybe like it did with Hines, will get a lot of, rally a lot of the local Republicans around him and maybe push him through the runoff. So that's kind of what I'm going to be looking to see. Is just, it will kind of give a similar, catapulting like it did with Hines after his Trump endorsement.
It is a test. It's a test. These two candidates are interesting to me because they really represent some heavy-hitting Republican families in North Carolina, and it seems like a little, small race, one race out of all of our 14 candidates. But this is an important one, 14 districts. But this is really some families coming together.
It is, and it's an important race for Republicans because this is one of the seats that they definitely think they're going to flip.
Right.
We know right now our congressional delegation has 7 Democrats and 7 Republicans, but we have new election maps, and now the 13th district, which was basically a flip district that could go either way, and Wiley Nickel beat Bo Hines in the general election. But now the 13th is much more Republican friendly, which is why there were so many candidates who ran the first time, and that we have a runoff. No one was able to get to that 30% threshold to win the race. So you have Brad Knott, whose father Joe Knott's been part of the conservative circles for a long time, and Kelly Daughtry, whose father was a longtime Republican legislator, led the Republicans in the House, ran for governor. And so the key thing about this race has seemed to have been who's the most conservative, who's the Trumpiest, who's going to be the most likely to work for Trump in the Congress coming up. And both have had criticisms. The criticism from Daughtry was, well, not work for Joe Biden. And Knott said, I was an assistant federal prosecutor. He was the president. Of course, I've worked for whoever was the president. Daughtry has been said to have voted for Obama and to have given money to Josh Stein, but she has in her ad said she's the Trump person and she's the one who's going to support Trump's agenda. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
Absolutely. It's interesting. In the beginning, we were all talking about, is Trump really going to be able to, is that weight going to matter in North Carolina? Well, now they're all racing to see who's going to be the Trumpiest.
In the Republican primary. Now, it'll be interesting to see whoever wins this runoff, what do they do between now and November to change that message or moderate it. I don't think they'll have to do it a lot because it's a much more Republican-friendly district, but we assume that they'll do at least something that will reach out also to Democrats.
Right.
That was a little bit of the dynamic also in the first district where you had Lori Buckout winning, and she had been running it. Sandy Smith, who is also, they were both portraying themselves who's the Trumpiest kind of a thing. And that's another district that's going to matter a lot because it's another one that Republicans are hoping will be a flippable district for them. So that is kind of the dynamic. I guess in the 6th as well, where it was Trump's endorsed candidate versus someone who bowed out of the race because of getting a job with Trump organization. So that he's definitely looming large in these primaries.
For sure. I mean, that's what happened with Walker. Tell me about the lieutenant governor's race. We have who are the top 2 there?
So we have Hal Weatherman and Jim O'Neill. Hal Weatherman was the former chief of staff for the former lieutenant governor and also the campaign manager for former Congresswoman Sue Myrick.
Right.
And then O'Neill ran against Stein for governor in 2020 and Attorney General. That's what I meant.
Sure.
And then is serving his 4th term as a district attorney for Forsyth County.
Boy, there's some deep roots in North Carolina politics on this ticket this time.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see when people ask me in this, I think it was 11 candidate race the first time around, who had a leg up. I said, well, I don't know. But if you go based on geographic advantage, I would say O'Neill, because he was a DA for Forsyth County, and most of the other main candidates were from smaller counties.
Sure.
And so if for nothing else, if you turn out the people who voted for you for DA, that would probably be enough to at least get you in a runoff, which it seems it has. Hal Weatherman probably has a stronger tie-in to the grassroots folks because of his work with Dan Forrest, because he's been involved in campaigns. It'll be interesting to see, A, who can get their own people to come out again on May 14th, and then how can they convince other people who didn't vote for them for the first time to come out on May 14th and vote for them? That's going to be a trick.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, oddly enough, this Jim O'Neill mention ties us into something else that happened this week. So North Carolina, Josh Stein announced this week, our Attorney General announced this week that North Carolina has finally cleared a nearly 30-year backlog of untested rape kits in North Carolina. North Carolina had one of the highest number of shelved kits sitting, collecting dust all over the state. It just wasn't a good system. It was a bureaucracy that was just not well managed. They weren't getting tested. Victims weren't having closure. Perpetrators were still walking the streets. And about 2017, 2018, the state legislature said, okay, we want to see exactly what the problem is. Send us a report, find out how many kits there are and what it would take to get this cleared up. Well, now it's here. They tested something like 1,200 rape kits. They've already had 114 arrests. You have the backstory on some of this. I tried to hit the highlights, but this is a big deal, and it really says something for somebody who's running for governor.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think Josh Stein probably had to do as he's running for governor, because it's one place where he could be hit, is the record of the Attorney General's office in dealing with these rape kits. This is something that goes back, as you said, a number of years, back when Roy Cooper, the current governor, was Attorney General for 16 years.
Sure.
And if there wasn't a problem before Cooper came in, there certainly was a problem throughout his entire tenure as Attorney General and throughout Josh Stein's entire tenure as Attorney General, getting these rape kits tested. We know that this was a key piece, you mentioned Jim O'Neill, of the 2020 race. Both of them accused each other of being to blame for untested rape kits, because O'Neill was a DA and Stein was the sitting Attorney General. And in fact, that led to a legal complaint. There was an ad that Josh Stein ran that accused O'Neill of leaving rapists on the streets by not testing these kits. O'Neill said, wait a minute, this violates this 1931 state law about making false statements about a fellow competitor for an election. He filed a complaint. The Wake County DA was going to take Stein to court on this suit. So Stein goes to federal court to try to block the law. Eventually it all gets settled. But this is sort of a coda to that. Yeah. But I think it's something that Stein probably had to do to sort of clear this issue as he goes up against Mark Robinson running for governor.
Sure. Yeah, this is a really big issue. Thoughts on this? Something we've all talked about a little bit in the newsroom, because there's a lot of victims out there who've said, what in the world is going on? Why isn't this case settled?
Yeah, it does seem like one of those topics that gives people a visceral reaction.
Sure.
You hear that all these rape victims, and there's key evidence in their trial that's not being brought forth because it's just sitting on a shelf somewhere.
Right.
If government can do anything, you think it could just take those off the shelf, test them, and present that evidence in court. So whoever, like you said, now another 100-something people have been arrested. Yeah. Those are people that have been walking the street this time as those, Kates have gone, those tests have gone untested on the shelf. So I do think it's something that will give people a little more confidence in their government and the judicial system and all of that. And it should be a bipartisan issue that we don't want that to happen again. Both parties have kind of worked on this issue and seen it as an important thing.
It is. That's an important point to make, that this really was a bipartisan effort to get the money going, get some people hired, and they've had over 1,000 hits, DNA hits, but a lot of those folks were already in jail for something else. Maybe somebody's passed away. It's just a shame that this has happened. It's good to see it cleared up.
And one final note of good news about this is something you never would have seen decades ago. You didn't have the DNA capability to match up these offenders with these crimes. If you were able to have a victim of rape identify the attacker through some process other than DNA, you could get a conviction. But this is one where you actually have real evidence that's going to hold up in court and that can put some really bad people behind bars.
Very interesting.
And just because it is a bipartisan issue does not mean it's one that is not going to be used in political action.
For sure.
Because both sides have they're both working on it, but they're also both feeling free to point the finger at the other one for being the cause of the problem or dragging their feet on it.
All right, so now when we start seeing ads, come back to this. We will have explained the whole thing, and now you know what to expect. Okay, North Carolina Supreme Court. Interesting arguments this week. Tell me what happened.
Yeah, I'll give you just a brief synopsis. For the first time since February, the state Supreme Court came back in this week for oral arguments in a handful of cases, and they'll be back in next week again, and then they'll be off from oral arguments until September.
Okay.
So they're really squeezing a lot in, and there were several interesting cases. One of them dealt with an issue that's of interest to people who care about school choice and charter schools, and that is whether a local government can use its zoning ordinances to block a charter school basically just because the board doesn't like charter schools. That is a case dealing with Wake Preparatory Academy and Wake Forest. It's a case that's gone on long enough that the Wake Prep Academy said, well, forget it, we're just going to build somewhere else. But the case is still going on, and the state Supreme Court seemed to be a little bit skeptical of Wake Forest trying to use this sidewalk requirement to block a charter school. So that's one. Another property rights issue that was of interest came out of Orange County, where this woman who owns a horse farm said that the county's ordinance required this nearby subdivision to build in a 30-foot buffer between her property and their property. The Supreme Court was kind of skeptical about that because basically the Orange County ordinance is unclear and kind of ambiguous. Basically, and the Supreme Court said, hey, if it's unclear, the default is let the property owner do what they want. The property owner in this case is the subdivision.
Sure.
And so no buffer requirement. That's probably where the court's heading in that case. We had a case just today going back to the 2016 election when Roy Cooper beat Pat McCrory. Afterwards, the McCrory campaign actually was another group associated with the McCrory campaign called the Legal Defense Fund. They filed some election protests. 4 voters who were targeted for protests said, no, we didn't vote illegally, and they sued. And so the State Court of Appeals has said that that lawsuit can go forward, and now the state Supreme Court is dealing with this issue. So we'll find out whether this lawsuit against lawyers involved in election protests can move forward. And the final one that's of interest that deals with not necessarily policy issues, but something that a lot of people care about is the death penalty and people sitting on death row going back to court again and again to try to get off death row. The latest case for this fellow named Brian Christopher Bell, who was involved in a 2001 murder. 89-year-old woman kidnapped, beaten, stuck in the trunk of her car. Her car is driven off to the end of the dirt road and burned while she's still alive, and she dies within the next day. He's been on death row for couple of decades. His latest claim is gender discrimination in the jury selection of his trial should get him a new trial. And the state Supreme Court heard that argument and had very interesting thoughts about whether there was any need to deal with this issue at this point.
That's interesting. All right, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting that they were very. It seemed like he was worried about gender discrimination against women in the jury selection when he and those other 2, I mean, they were 18, 19 years old at the time, and they had killed this woman, burned her alive, and a woman, and then they're going to say, well, we're very concerned about women being on the jury because there's already 10 women on the jury, and the question is, are we going to have an 11th woman? And I guess they had chosen to have a man, and so they said, well, that's discrimination against that 11th woman. But yeah, it was. Also interesting fact on that, I guess, is just we were talking about Kelly Daughtry being in that runoff with Knott for the 13th district. The woman who was murdered, the 89-year-old woman, was actually her great aunt. So it was Leo Daughtry's aunt and Leo Daughtry's Kelly Daughtry's father.
Sure.
And he actually had taken a break from his campaign.
He's
after that.
Governor, yeah.
Yeah. So
back
that was
in
a big story back then that the Republican candidate for governor had to step aside when his aunt was killed that way, but those who had murdered her are trying to, I guess, they're still find ways to
another bite of the apple. Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Very interesting. All right. So it all comes back. There's common threads through all North Carolina politics. One of the things that we'll have, if you take a look at our YouTube channel today, Mitch and I did a great breakdown of our latest poll, fresh out of the field this past weekend, talking to lots of North Carolina voters about what they think about North Carolina politics. Who are they going to vote for in November? Where is it leading? We're seeing some races really tightening.
Yeah, we only did 2 of the horse races,
sure.
and both of those were close. They were within the margin of error. One was the presidential race, and this was the first time. The last time we did the Carolina Journal poll, we had Trump and Biden, because by that time it was pretty clear that Donald Trump and Joe Biden were going to be the major party candidates. And then at that point we had Trump, Biden, or someone else.
Okay.
This time around we added Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to the mix. So you could select Trump, Biden, RFK Jr., or someone else.
Sure.
And I believe it was 43% for Trump, 39% for Biden, 7% for RFK Jr., and then still 4 or 5% for someone else.
Sure.
So the poll has a margin of error of plus or minus 4 points. So that's really the margin of error. Then the other big one that has tightened is the governor's race. Mark Robinson versus Josh Stein. The last time around, Robinson had about a 5-point lead. This time it's down to 2. So well within the margin of error. Neither candidate should claim to be leading because that could go either way. Very tight. And that race in the poll had both the Green Party and Libertarian Party candidates on there as well, who took up several percentage points. So it'll be interesting to see where those go in the general election, if they go anywhere.
Right. One of the interesting points about this is the Quinnipiac poll came out earlier this week as well, and they did not have RFK on it. And I thought it was interesting how in our poll, when you look at the two together, they're 48-46 Trump with no one else. When you add RFK in, it feels like he's pulling a little more from Biden, probably equally from both, but maybe a little bit more from Biden.
Yeah, it's interesting to see where that goes. If you look at where our poll was last month versus this month, it looks like some come from Trump, some come from Biden, but a lot of them come from the someone else.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
they were going to vote for someone else. There is a someone else. That's where they're going to now. So it'll be interesting to see whether you end up in the long run have more potential Biden voters going to RFK or more potential Trump voters. And you can see how he could appeal to people on either side. Obviously, Kennedy name, big among the Democrats. If you look at his environmental record, he's about as left on the environment as you can get, which would appeal to a lot of Democrats. But a lot of the people who like Trump as being an outsider, sort of against the establishment, not believing what government tells them about certain things. We know RFK was a big anti-vax guy. So some of the people who might like Trump would also like RFK. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes.
All right, for a full breakdown of all of those polled numbers, you can go to carolinajournal.com, and also we've got a video posted on our YouTube channel right around this one that has a full breakdown of all those numbers. As we wrap it up here, I want to talk to you about a little bit about what you're going to write for tomorrow in Carolina Journal. I look forward to your columns every week.
Yeah, so, well, Donald Bryson, the CEO of John Locke, he passed around a story from NPR that I thought was really interesting, where a guy had worked there for 25 years. He had started to notice, we had at least 26% or so of our base was conservative viewership or listenership, and then it kind of slipped down to 11% now, and the liberals went from about 35 now up to almost 70%. So over time it's been more and more left, and so he was saying, it's probably our coverage of a few different things, especially during the Black Lives Matter movement. They went very hard towards DEI. He looked at, the editors there and found that it was 87 registered Democrat, 0 registered Republican.
Okay.
So it's just kind of like we saw with UNC system, some of the professorships and all of that. So I was going to, connect that intellectual diversity is important, in media. You have some organizations like ours which are ideologically aligned with John Locke Foundation has specific precepts that we put forward, and there's some on the left, but the ones that are mainstream, especially NPR's government funded and presents itself as mainstream, they should have some kind of objectivity there. And I guess I was also going to connect that to a court case from the Wilmington area, where there was sort of, at the time, it was 2020, May of 2020, the same month that George Floyd died, an incident in Wilmington area where a racist mob of white people they would be called the lynch mob, and by CNN.
Wow.
Went to this house of this black family, and then, after the facts came out a bit, it's turned out, well, the police officer, it was his minor sister, a girl who had gone missing, and they're going from house to house. They're looking in the woods.
Not just this house.
Not just that house.
Okay.
And they're going house to house looking for a missing little girl.
Right.
And so they are now suing, and they won this week. Pender County Court awarded the people in the mob $6 million because they had been portrayed as a racist white lynch mob by the media and by the Civil Rights Lawyers Group is who they sued.
Sure.
And so I'll just kind of connect that as some of these media, kind of like NPR, they jump the gun maybe because they don't have that intellectual diversity, and we're, if there's something that everybody in their sphere of influence or friends and family are all on the same page about, police and racism and all of that being a problem, then they might not look as critically at something like that. And it seems like they may not have, since the jury just awarded that racist mob $6 million. So
yeah, all right. Looking forward to seeing that story. Thanks so much for tuning in. I appreciate you being here with us on the Debrief. Check out CarolinaJournal.com for David's column tomorrow. All the latest on the poll and everything happening in Raleigh and North Carolina, politics and public policy. Talk to you soon.